systems. Today's session will be recorded, which means if you don't want to be, let's say, on cam and be streamed live, you have now an opportunity, I guess, to read the room. So, but just to be on the safe side, because of privacy reasons, I need to mention it. So we'll kick off today, and it's a very special moment, at least for me, because I was there 20 years ago at the first international conference on server-oriented computing. I was a little bit younger then, and it was taking place in Trento in Italy. And it's now 20 years later, and during that first edition, it was Marco Aiello there, and myself, and both of us a little bit younger at the beginning, you know, more or less in our careers. So it's very much a pleasure to introduce Marco Aiello, because Marco will be in the keynote speaker this morning with a very interesting presentation on service composition through large language models in general, and ChatGPT more in particular. We know each other way back. In fact, Marco just explained to me that he has not only studied here, he has done his master's here in engineering at the Sapienza University, but he also he served in military. So he also has been, let's say, going to the military school here. And throughout his career, he has worked in several places. One of them is quite long in Groningen University, where he still holds the position as a honorary professor. In those days, for some reason, we didn't collaborate that much, but because since we are so close, it's less easy to collaborate for some reason, which is very often true in academia. Okay, anyway, and after that, of course, Marco started at the Stuttgart University, and in particular, he's spearheading now the service computing department. And I'm not going to take away any more of his time, because it's much more interesting. So much of the story.
Yeah, many thanks for the invitation. Actually, the first keynote I ever gave was at this workshop. You guys invited me in 2007 in Vienna. So I said it's great to do this again. And also, I got the invitation. I thought it's easy. I use ChatGPT. It's going to take me 5 minutes to prepare it. And indeed, I asked ChatGPT for a cover letter, for a cover page, and we generated this. And because I said keynote services, ChatGPT composition, and I said I don't like it. I don't. You guys like it? No, I want something a little more technical. So please give me something as a software architecture inside. And it generated this. I'm still not too happy. Now you might wonder if I'm serious. Say, hey, did you do the whole presentation with ChatGPT? For real? No, I also use Canva. So this is what Canva is, the cover. Good. But let's go on by exploring ChatGPT to see how far we can go. So, spoiler alert, we're going to tell you something about the conclusions. I asked ChatGPT, okay, so are you good or not at service composition? Can I use you for engineering services? And ChatGPT read back, well, in summary, it's proficient providing information, explanation, general advice regarding service composition, context of web service composition. It is not capable of actually performing web service composition tasks. It's a very balanced capability and limitations. You can do it yourself and we'll go through it. So it's in essence, while ChatGPT can be helpful, it doesn't do it. So the talk is over. Right? I could finish it here. But there's one important thing on this page that I would like to point your attention to. It can make mistakes. So I didn't trust it. I didn't think it can reflect well enough on itself. Well, let me try if it's true or not. Right? So the talk will go on. So first of all, we have to be what is web service composition. I took here the first definition is actually from the paper we wrote with ICSOC 2003. And back then we said, web service can be defined in terms of composition of existing constituent service on the basis of the standard business process execution language, which at the time was quite popular and we had a lot of hopes of using it. ChatGPT itself now says service composition involves integrating various independent services to provide a comprehensive solution for functionality that individual service cannot deliver alone. So this is more or less what we mean. There's not one unique definition. I think we could agree, or I hope we can agree with these, one older and one older. And indeed, it's exactly 20 years ago, with respect to the first ICSOC conference. There was already some initiatives like the web service workflow language with Frank Lyman from 2001, Microsoft had its own version, Xlang, and these, as you might remember, merged in what then became Beetle, which was first, let's say, proposed in 2003, so 20 years ago. And then at the first ICSOC, there was a paper on a web service composition from Master and his colleagues that actually 10 years ago got the Test of Time Award, which was the Roman model on composition based on automatons, right? And we had our own, which was planning and monitoring execution web service request, in which we said we're going to use AI planning to do this task of composition. And I went back and I looked at the slides that I had back then. So this is what actually I was proposing with this stick man there on the left. And you say, oh, you know, you want to do your composition, you come with your goal, you have a monitor, a planner that produces the plan, an executor, today you would call an orchestrator, and somewhere you have web service implementation. We still believe in UDDIs back then, so we said that's where you find them. So you can see that this had a prominent position. I mean, back then, so UDI, Heuvel was a product. And then another slide says, how do you do your composition? This is what you have to run. You have to come with this language, which is an extension of the temporal logic, in which you say what you want to achieve. We had this idea that you should be able to also put like linear constraints inside. So you could say things like the price would be less than something and so on. And then you say, I want a final price that amounts to that amount. So that was the way, with the formal way of defining a composition. And then one last slide from that presentation, because I think it's very vintage. We also had an implementation that ran on a phone. And for the young people, there was no iPhone in 2010. I think in 2006. So this is how we would build an interface. Nokia was the leader, and then, okay, the interface is in Italian, but the idea is, okay, I go through a set of menus and I can express my service composition. Okay, then we evolved a little bit in what we were doing, and this I would say for me is one of the final milestones of that research for us. We built a planner which was based on modeling the planning problem as a constraint satisfaction problem, was a bounded planner. And the idea would be that you would still come with those kind of very formal specification of a composition, then you would throw it to the planner, you would propose a plan. The nice thing about this planner was that, or is that, it can deal with uncertainties. So if something goes wrong at execution time, it can replan it and say, okay, I already planned it here, how do I still get to the goal? Despite the fact that something didn't work. I wanted to book something, it failed. I wanted to pay something, it didn't work. And this plan was able to interleave planning and execution in order to arrive to a goal if. And this, as I said, was the final milestone. So this line of the paper in 2016. Then last year at ICSOC, I presented a vision paper in which I pushed myself all the way down to 2072 to go 50 years ahead of time. And back then, what I said, like service composition is a little bit like what we were seeing in the automotive industry. So if you're following the developments on self-driving and autonomous driving, they have defined as 5 levels of autonomy, right? Extremely autonomous, completely non-autonomous. And I said, well, composition is kind of a similar situation. We started with composing things by hand, so you do all the wiring by hand, you write all the glue code, and then we started seeing some tooling that gives you support, and then we saw better tooling and better ways of defining the interaction between the services, and slowly we should get to the level of automation in which maybe you don't even have to say what you want, the system just learns it from your behavior, what your intention is, and you get the plan executed. And as they say in the automotive industry, going from one level to the other is not an instant. So some steps are much harder to go from levels to the following than others. So the first step might be easier than going from level 3 to level 4. So what we're doing is saying, hey, there's kind of, let me say, a research agenda saying, how do we move one level to the other? What are the things that we have to solve and fix? And then I said, we need a challenge. The challenge that I proposed was to actually use service composition to guide a democratic country and say by 2072 or 75, sorry. By 2075, we will have the first prime minister which is completely service-based, service-based. And there's a bunch of advantages to this. No corruption, working 24/7, and you would still vote, right? Because you can vote the policies and say, okay, I want that service composition prime minister rather than that one because of the policies that they're going to implement. But you have to build it, and it has to be capable of And then I also illustrated an example of something that could happen in 2052. It's a whole scenario. I don't go through it because it will take me too much time. You can find it in the paper. But it's basically a scenario that could happen in an evening between two people and a setting which has a lot of IoT, a lot of services, and service composition to glue these facts together. So, back to now. So I'm looking at technologies that could help me do those jump between levels, and LLM is a big, interesting technology, having a breakthrough effect in many fields. So the question is, can that be one of the technologies that brings me closer? And based on this, we started playing with the idea in the group, and I tried, this was last year, I tried, okay, let's see what happens if I say to ChatGPT, I think this will feel free. Given the name of the country, find out the weather is in the capital using the API of the open method.com. And what is the value of the local currency for €1? And show the city with the currency value in Google Maps via the Google Maps API. And I want it in Python. Can you do that composition? And this is what it generated, to my surprise, actually. So it did give me the Python code with all these things, but it didn't execute right away. Right? So there was still some problems. So first of all, you have to substitute your API keys. And then if you look into the interface of this specific service, get capital city, get capital country doesn't exist. So I hallucinated that interface. We found it somewhere else and put it there, but that thing doesn't exist. So this doesn't work. So I asked my colleague, Ilche, can you please make it run? I'm not a very good programmer, I have to admit that. So I said, can you please make this thing run? It took him 19 iterations, almost 3 hours of interactions with it, and then in the end, and 5 manual interventions. So he had to, doesn't exist, removing the, if you remove that, it works. This URL is wrong, so you have to fix the URL. This API doesn't exist, and this service doesn't exist anymore, so it was stale data. Open menu doesn't require a key, so that you can remove. And then there was this extra parameter which was useless and we removed it anymore. So in the end, it actually did work. So, wait, before that, I can also use the deployments. I asked ChatGPT, can you give me a Kubernetes script to deploy this program so I can actually run it? It generated the Kubernetes code, and it gave me also the commands to use on the shell to actually have it run. And after this extra work, we actually got our program to run and execute. Now, this brings me to already one of the first conclusions. This is the tool, right? This LLM or ChatGPT is a tool. So it clearly cost me time to make it work, 3 hours in this case. But what you should think is, how much time would it cost me if I didn't have it? And if I had to do it start from scratch, maybe it would have cost me 8 hours, or maybe it would have cost me an hour. So it's in the position in which you can see that it's not able to do it yet, but it's helping it to go in that direction. And that's the thing, what is the strongest point right now. So we got intrigued by this idea, and asked Robin, which should be here, but it's not, but one of the pieces to extend the experiment. Okay, let's try a little bit more and try to see what is all the potentiality of ChatGPT. This case, ChatGPT 4. So what we did is we looked at the last 20 years of literature of service composition. A lot was from ICSOC. Took examples of how people were showing how their system worked to illustrate the service composition. Identified 6 examples as meaningful and current. So it's an online shop, there's a travel agency, of course, transport, book. These are the number of services involved in the composition, and say, let's try to redo those examples using ChatGPT to actually work. And further, we divided this experimentation in 5 tasks. So the first task is try to generate services in the OpenAPI specification. So I tell ChatGPT, this is the composition, this is the services, please implement them for me. So no discovery, just the composition basically, not just the generation of a component. Then we ask, can you now compose these based on the API specification that you just built, right? And then see what will happen. Then say, okay, now I can't implement them ourselves. Let's see if you can find them. So do the service discovery. Can you find services that would behave in that composition? Then automate the task of service composition. And then if you wait to the extreme and say, I just tell you natural language what I want, and you do the composition. More or less what I was doing in an example before. And then we looked at how the performance was of ChatGPT with respect to this, how many prompts we would need, and so on. So I won't tell you all the results because Robin is going to do it. I don't know, the time has changed 3 times. He just wrote to me, it should be at 11:30. It's an Aiello workshop, AI and process automation. But anyway, he's going to give you the details of all the evaluation. I just want to tell you one about the fully automated composition. And basically what we experience is that it is capable of doing it. You need many prompts. Funny enough, sometimes it refuses. So sometimes it says, sorry, I can't do that for you. So I cannot do this composition. And then you have to insist and say, okay, but if you do this and that, can you now do the composition? And then you get it to do it. And then the usual problems as before. So the conclusions of this one was, of this set of experience was, okay, can generate the artificial services quite well and the OpenAPI specification and do the composition. So if you guided it already with technical information, you can go pretty far. It does the story pretty well. Sometimes the lists are different from the same query in different moments in time. That's the characteristic of these models, whether it's statistics and the statistical generation. And sometimes it has failed data. So it discovers something that used to exist, but it doesn't exist anymore. Same in the automated search composition. Sometimes it works, sometimes not. Sometimes it doesn't find a specification. Sometimes it hallucinates, as we saw before. This we don't. Normally you have group meetings. And then ChatGPT has problems starting active service and starting text requests only. And as I mentioned, sometimes it refuses to generate a composition. Just a, I can't do this. And then you have to feed it a little bit more to get it. So the first insights that we gained from this experiment is the correctness of the composition is not guaranteed. Right? So if my old planner of 20 years ago or 10 years ago, I know that if the result is there is correct, here I don't know. And my approach was, okay, Ilche, please check it for me, or Roman, please see if this is correct. What can we do to make it work? Second thing is you don't know where this stuff comes from. You don't know how it generated, what is the provenance. This is the problem many companies have and say, no, you cannot use Copilot, you cannot use ChatGPT because what if we get sued because we don't know where the code comes from? Right? So that's also the same issue here. And the other thing is how do you evaluate the performance of the generated composition? Is it a good composition? What makes it, how do you say that was the right thing that you wanted? Not only should it be correct, but maybe also should be efficient, minimal with respect to some kind of performance standard. So determining the quality of the solution, what it misses, and the various reactions to the prompt is something that is not straightforward. And we're generally saying, okay, the problem or the issue of prompt engineering is also very valid here. What is a good way of doing those interactions? On average, it took us many interactions, about 10, 12 interactions. Can I do it with less? Or is that the minimum amount of interaction I will need? And LLMs apply to natural language parts can we integrate formal tools. There's also a general issue. How do we take advantage of the beautiful statistical models with more, say, symbolic reasoning kind of models, the tools that we have. And also there's a lot of work going on. One thing I didn't manage to put in the presentation was the amount of papers about ChatGPT and LLMs which appear in arXiv. I wanted to find the statistics, but my impression is that in the last year and a half, the number of papers that have the word LLMs with ChatGPT is the same as blockchain over 10 years. it's amazing. Just write that into archive, you see how many papers there are. I'm following the ones about planning and LLMs, and there's 2-3 papers a week that come out. Half of them say it doesn't work, and half say it's fantastic. Right? So this is but it's really hard to keep up. We're trying, but it's really hard to follow. So, with respect to architecture, I showed you our own architecture from some years ago, and then if you just go on Google Images and say architecture for service computing, this is what comes out. It's the usual idea of this pattern of publish, find, subscribe, right? And you go on, and you go on, and you go on. And ourselves, we work a lot on buildings, IoT-based systems. And this is the architecture, what we usually put into our applications. We have the IoT, we classify it, and try to understand the status of the world. You throw it to a context component that has an idea. Then you have to come with your goals. What is it that you're trying to do? The goals can come from a dashboard. They can be learned from user behavior. They can be explicitly input. It can be a declarative language, which is the thing that we mostly use. And then I have my smartest component, which is the planner. The planner takes current state of the world, desire, and start building a plan. This is an abstract plan, then you send it to an orchestrator. The orchestrator is the one who actually does the invocations. In between the orchestrator and the world, we put a scheduler, because for some applications like the ones we work with, the actions are long lasting. So if I want to turn on a light, it's immediate. If I want to change the temperature of the room, it might take hours. So sometimes I have to schedule things over time. And then you have the typical mapper cycle where you execute, you monitor, you plan, you execute, you monitor, you plan. But now I said that LLM could be a stepping stone to move forward. What would an architecture with LLMs inside would look like? Okay, this is purely speculative. We didn't build this yet, but this is the kind of ideas that I have. So the idea would be that you have your prompt engineer or the user who wants a service composition. So the first step, you go to the service composition. Then, once you have your composition, hopefully correct, maybe not, then you go to service discovery. So now you have to find the instances. You find them, great, check that they are correct. Don't find them, maybe you say, well, some of them I couldn't create myself. So that it is capable of creating services. And then if you create them, you have to deploy them. So possibly please make them available in my world, in my ecosystem. Then the services that you discover or the services that you created, you want to check. For sure, there's a validation step that is very important because you cannot trust these things in any possible way. You have to check. Like a side note, the other day I was writing a state of the art, and then I wrote down, oh, can you give me a state of the art for this and that? We generated a state of the art, and then there was a paper by you and others, 2023, that did exactly what I wanted to do. I was so pissed off because I think, come on, this is what I want to do. Someone already did it. And then I looked up, doesn't exist. That paper's not there. So I said, so well what I wanted, then you made it up for me. Think of making me happy, but I'm scared. So.
Is it really so that for you?
Yes, but I have checked it, it's a move, right? It was really move, I don't know why. But so this is an important aspect, right? This instant and checking and testing. And you see, I put a lot of loops back, right? Loops back to the prompt engineer because this is not going to be a one shot. For sure, this is going to be many interaction with the user and say, okay, please change this. No, please correct that. It is capable of some reflection of the system, but not yet enough to make things work. Right? So it gives you some form of correction of itself, but our experience is that never enough to make it work right away. And then I go to my usual orchestrator, and now I have the executor, and also very important, the monitor. And then they were going to go on what I deployed with what I found and make my service composition work. Here, I put these little symbols saying, okay, ChatGPT seems reasonably good at some of these tasks, but we have no idea how these things work. Right? And I don't know if ChatGPT can ever work here, or here we have to have something else. Some error improver, some formal methods that correct it, something else based on statistical execution. But how these components actually work, to me, is not clear. Maybe that's something that might be interesting to research. So going back to the initial speculation, we have these levels. I would say that we're reasonably well in this point right now in the community. We have some instances that have worked there, maybe here. So is this actually what can bring us to the next step? And the other reflection I like to do is how does this affect us as researchers or ICT specialists, right? Because to some extent I'm saying, oh, look, this thing could do everything for you. Everything for you to the point, like, why do I need you? And let me generalize a little bit with respect to the job market. And the question to you, especially Massimo, why do we still work 40 hours? You work 40 hours, right? Not more. And it was this guy that most likely you heard of before, that 100 years ago, said, you know, right now we should be working 3 hours a day. Why did he say that? Well, basically he saw the effect of automation and mechanization on society. And he said, 1870, we start having the Industrial Revolution, and then you see that the working hours go down. You have automation in the factories, you have automation in agriculture. We don't need to work that many hours. And he says this in the 30s, or early 30s. So basically says, if I project that over time, I see a linear line going down. And I go on, so in 100 years, should be there. But then in the world, some tiny phenomenon occurred in which it stopped going down that fast. And here I have examples of Taiwan, Germany, France, on the amount of working hours per week. And if you're thinking, yeah, of course, but those Taiwanese are way more efficient and productive than the others, the answer is actually no. If you want to measure that in GDP per person, they're all in more or less the same place. It's just working. Or what economically the same productivity. And this is the evolution of the job market over time. So you can see that agriculture went from a manual enterprise with a lot of repetitive work on a small scale, and then didn't need that much workforce. So it drastically diminished to the point where we are now. Manufacturing kind of increased and decreased. The 60s were still strong, but also decreased. So where are those jobs going? They're going to trade. They're going to telecommunication, to education, lucky not for us, I guess. Telecommunication, healthcare, financial services. So there's a shift that automation brought that threw away jobs in these manual intensive fields and brought in more to knowledge intensive fields. So I guess you see where I'm going. Right? But now we have this automation results on the knowledge side to some extent. Will that blow away jobs? And you can see all kinds of predictions. So Goldman Sachs says 300 million jobs will be lost or degraded. And these people made a study by analyzing tasks. So what they did is they looked at 1,000 occupations. They divided occupation into work activities and the work activities into tasks. And then for each task, they said, could something like ChatGPT actually have an effect on that task? Could you automate it or automate part of it? And they came up with the conclusion that 80% of the US workforce would be affected at least in 10% of their tasks. For 19% or for 20%, at least half of the tasks would be affected by some tooling like ChatGPT. And for about 50% of all the tasks, so for 100% of the workers, you could do that in a single quadrant. So you would do it automatically, but you wouldn't get something worse than what a human would do. And most of it. And then they say, what is the exposure based on the job that you're doing? And say, well, mathematicians are at higher risk, tax preparers, financial quantitative analysis, survey researchers, writers and authors, journalists should also be there, and so on. So you see how many jobs actually have tasks that can be affected by something like a good working large language. And then they say, okay, but on the other hand, they're safe. If you want to take notes for your future job, agricultural, athletes, bus, truck drivers, cooks, dishwashers, and so on. there's also a little bit of bad news there. Many of these, if you look at them, is exactly what robots are going to take. So you have to think if that's really a good choice or not. But you see, these are not always in intensive.
In fact, most of them are actually already taken over.
Right. Did you see the video of Boston Dynamics with the
Yeah.
constructors? Give me that robot at a decent price and within 2 years, I can start into the
Yeah, there's two robots that also carry out stone masonry, wellhead pumping, driving operations, mechanics, you know.
It's just a matter of price.
Yeah.
It's not just that Atlas of Boston Dynamics cost.
Yeah.
That's the only thing. Okay, and then you have the other side, and so people say, oh, okay, no worries, this is too much of a hype, won't happen. So the AI won't take over any jobs, and so. But again, I don't know if you saw this Spectrum AI. So Walmart introduced in spring this year, Spectrum AI, which is software that does the negotiation with suppliers. And they tried it out, and they were expecting that they would close 20% of the deals with suppliers. Actually, it managed to close 64% of the deals. Additionally, it saved money than the human being. And happy with this, and also thinking the automation they can have in the stores, they predict they're going to get away 1 million jobs by 2026. So this idea that jobs are actually at stake is true. You may say whatever you want about LLMs, if you like them or not, if they're intelligent or not, but they are taking away jobs. And traditionally, you have 2 points of view. You have a neoclassical view on jobs and says, well, whenever there's a change in technology or a paradigm shift, there's new jobs created out of that. So 100 years ago, we didn't have programmers, now we have programmers. So that compensated for the loss of work in agriculture. But there's others saying, no, that's not actually the case anymore. Things have changed in time. So productivity growth and employment growth started to become decoupled. So it's not true that there's a good economy and some new technology brings that new economy. Then necessarily you get new jobs. What if machines are going to tomorrow, they no longer need that skilled labor to operate? Skilled labor would be us. Right? And then finally, innovation and progress really heard large numbers of workers. So economists have been aware of this possibility for almost 2 centuries, but apparently was not really heard of. And this is how the actual figure to show you a little bit what's happening. In the last 10 years, the economy is going to be fine. Right? So productivity went up, national global growth went up, jobs stopped. And this is kind of new because before, jobs and GDP went together. And now they're not. So someone's getting rich, ain't the workers. Right? So this is the serious concern that people, or especially politicians, should be aware of. And it's saying that people are lazy, they don't want to work, that's not acceptable. That's not what is going on. This is honestly, it's less work. So you might want to say, I want my job, I don't want to lose my job. So for those kind of people, Massimo, I'm talking about you. I have some good messages and some messages of hope. So it actually turns out that in some cases, it's not true that jobs are created because of a need. And I have 2 examples for you. The first one is Parkinson's law, I don't know if you remember this law, that says the work expands based on budget, kind of, right? So the more you work, the more budget you have, the more work you'll find. And in the end, it's a beautiful, super diverse piece within the 50s. And the guy looks at the ministry in England, which basically, I think the ministry for colonies, that after the colonies are gone, has more people in the office than people in the field. Right? And it says that's because the growth of jobs is governed by this formula. And it says, this is the value of new people to be hired every year. And it's a function of the employees who want to be promoted, because to be promoted, you have to have people under you. So the more people have under you, the better. So you want to hire people. It's not task-based. The time spent on internal memoranda. So if you had a lot of people and you sent a lot of memoranda, you show noise, so it means that you need more people to deal with all of them. Plus a factor of the difference of age, so how long you will stay in the organization, divided by the number of weeks the files actually completed. So you shouldn't be efficient, otherwise you cannot hire too many people. You have to show that things are slow. So in this case, you see there's nothing that has to do with GDP or anything else or the job market. It's simply you can replicate yourself. Okay, this was public administration. And then the second book comes from actually the study, Bullshit Jobs. Anybody read this book? No? It's 10 years old, but I think it's still fine. So what this guy did, he actually wrote an article, then he opened a blog, and people start posting about their experience at work. And so if you thought you had a bullshit job, you would put your post there. And he collected this and made it into a book. And it's absolutely funny. So there's people that says, I don't know what I'm doing this. I hate my life because I need this job. And he categorized these bullshit jobs into 5 categories. The first one is functions who serve to make you superior to importance. You just hire someone under you that you can command. So in the morning you feel, oh, I delegated something, so it must be good. And the person, of course, has nothing to really do. Rules, right? To harm or deceive others on behalf of the employer. Call centers would apply, be in this category, right? But
Mafia.
Huh?
Say,
sorry?
mafia also.
I that guy from the market put in the blog on the market. But okay, maybe that will do. For dark papers, temporary fixed problems they could be fixed permanently. Box stickers to create the appearance that something is being done. You just do something and you fill forms. Our administrations are great at this. Travel. Tax allowance to create extra work for those who actually don't need it. So again, here there's nothing which is related to a job market or GDP or growth of the economy. This is all basically societal based, sociologically based. But anyway, if you have the chance, I think that's a very funny book. And then I think I'm almost running out of time. Doesn't any tell you something about the energy label? So I think it's important, also a lot into energy and sustainability, to actually understand the impact of the things that we do. So in that extent, this is what I was studying yesterday to Anton and we stop. So to assess this, I actually like to tell you, well, it costs some energy and some CO2 to actually be here and give this talk and prepare. This is a study that recently came out that tries to assess the CO2, the consumption of energy of ChatGPT prompts. It makes some scenarios, some components of any type of prompting, and so on. The values in itself, I don't think are the important part, but the ballpark is. So basically, this is about 1,000 times more than doing a Google search. So if you do a Google search or a prompt, more or less, you can expect you're consuming 1,000 times more energy. So for this presentation, I did 72 prompts with ChatGPT, excluding experiments, that doesn't count, just to generate those images and other things. I lost on my laptop this one actually for 342. So Mac with an M2, and that's actually specification of consumption. I took 2 minutes of thinking because ChatGPT did most of the thing. And that's not electricity, it's thermal energy. And I actually need to get you this. So the whiskey is actually dominating. I didn't know, but actually using whiskey is very energy intensive. And so let's start with that one so we get out of it. So 7 kilograms per liter of alcohol. A bottle is 0.7. Usually whiskey is bottle is 40, 43%. So it's 4 kilograms. Is those interactions with ChatGPT rather even in my lab, okay, forget the thinking time, but these revenue. So more or less I'm saying the ICT usage to prepare this talk is in the ballpark of half a kilogram. And then I asked ChatGPT to do the same. So can you tell me how much you think it takes in terms of energy to give a presentation of an hour? And it estimates that you need 5 hours of work on the laptop. And then I asked, well, can you ask can you add to this computation the fact of using ChatGPT to prepare it? And then we added this factor of 36 kilowatt hours, and those are estimates, actual values should be lower or higher, so all this disclaimer things, but it comes out with 0.56, which is very close to what I came up with. Very different, because it gives more weight to itself rather than the laptop. In my case, it was a little bit the other way around. But it comes out with an estimate which is very close to what I actually. Without any use, I factor that out at some point.
And
Otherwise,
probably it's more alcohol ChatGPT.
The guys that open the eye for sure. But they last week. Now that's power. I can translate into carbon emissions. For that, I have to do some things. I prepared the presentation in Stuttgart, actually at my home. The average emissions per kilowatt hour in Germany last year were 380 grams per kilowatt hour. This varies, right? It varies over the time depending on the energy mix, depends on how generated energy. But the average for Germany for last year was 380. So basically, this presentation, the preparation presentation, cost me 211 grams of CO2 emissions. Then, of course, I came here. I also came around telling me that to compensate this, I need 104 kilograms. Oh, and this is just one way. But I came here also to meet you guys, so it's good. If you're interested in this kind of topic, I wanted to mention we just started a working group in Informatics Europe. How many of you know what Informatics Europe is?
Don't know.
No, how many of you know? Okay, so okay, I thought it would be worse. So Informatics Europe is basically the association of computer science departments across Europe. And the idea is to coordinate the efforts for making policies, discussing issues of the community at the European level and at the national level. It works by working groups. So there's a working group on education, which has been very successful. One on gender balance, which is also working very well. And this we just started on green ICT. So if you're interested, just send me an email and I'll be happy to involve you in this one. And we just started, so there's still a lot of space to play. So my conclusion is ChatGPT and LLMs are tools, and as such should be regarded. They're tools and they help, and you have to know how to use your tools. They're getting better and better as tools. And this is what I think is interesting for us also as a community. And that's the second point. You can see how much I can do in terms of service composition. It doesn't do it for me, so it's not a magic box that does everything, but it simplifies a lot of tasks. And it shifts a little bit the focus, right? I go from thinking of how does the system do the composition to how do I correct these compositions that are half-baked that I get back. And it does have an effect on those. I'm one of those, I wouldn't say neo-luddists, but I was thinking there is something going on there. And if you're a baby boomer, okay, you're close to pension, you're fine. For Generation X, that will be me. You should have some concerns. If you're younger, think about it. So I did have some students come to me and say, hey, why am I studying computer science? Will I have a job tomorrow? This thing can program as good as I do. Okay, it's programming in the small, not in the large yet. Right? But it is a concern that even the young generations have. This was a bachelor's student. And that concludes my talk with this a little bit of optimism.
Okay, we still have room for a couple of questions.
A question which is one part, since you were, I think, intentionally provocative with this labor debate, and you didn't mention, probably you give it for granted, and then, of course, the problem is not ChatGPT itself, but it's close together with our economy system. So, in our economy system, if we can, let's say, half the number of person hour for the job, then we need to divide by half the number of employees because we need unemployment for our economic system. So this means that automation in general, if you study from agriculture, does not necessarily lead to unemployed people. It is automation plus our economy. So for your last slide, maybe for the last generation, they should change into the economy system that they want for their future.
Absolutely.
Automation will continue.
Yeah, absolutely, and I hope so. So I'm not, I think our ability to continue, it's just the economic models that we used to have to change. And this rich getting richer is the issue, right? Who's getting from automation? Of the fact that you're shopping on Amazon for a lot of the things that you used to go to the shop. Who's making money? Society or Jeff? Right? So Jeff is making all the money, and that's the problem. And especially in an economic system like the American one, where there's not that much sharing back with the poor, that's an issue. So I think politically there's going to be, and there should be a lot of attention to this problem.
Yeah, I was thinking about market. So do you think that there's a lack of the high demand of AI into many Silicon Valley? Do you think that jobs moving to that directions?
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw the salary of some of them, and I'm absolutely amazed because they're 5-6 times my salary. Yeah. So, but for let's say, how many of those? How many are actually losing the job at Walmart or at somewhere else? And the two don't compensate each other. And again, we're doing a power law in which we give a lot of money to a few people, and there's a lot of people that have no money.
Unbalanced.
And that imbalance somehow has to be solved, to me, at the political level. That's the only way you can solve it. Not at the technological level. Technology goes on, and it's great, and should go on. But at the political level, you have to put attention to the fact things are changing. And you cannot call the people at the bottom at the tail of the power law lazy or effective or ignorant. Right? That's not the solution.
So, sorry, I would like to move to the technical part.
Thank you.
Yeah, because I'm from Generation X, so I keep trying to arrive to the calculation, to the calculation. In your architecture, it is clear that everything is based on, let's say, ChatGPT in all the features. So you are saying that all your life cycle is based on something that you don't control, that you don't know even how it is built, and it is also stateless. Do you think it's worth? And it is continuing evolving. Do you think it could be part of this approach?
Let me just get back to that slide because I think it's easier to do like this. So, thank you. I agree with your premise up to here. From here, not ChatGPT based anymore. Here, where I said is like, this I don't know how it works, and I don't know how it will work. Right? So it's true that the first part I'm very much based on ChatGPT and say, please do this. But then I have this one, which maybe in this architecture is the most important component, which is that verification step. That how do I, what exactly what you were saying? How do I know that this is correct? Or how do I know that tomorrow you're going to give me something else? Which you will, because we saw with Discovery that that's what happens, right? So that, when we say trash or problems, I have to go and clean up here. And here, I wish ChatGPT could do it. My current understanding is that it doesn't. I will say something more about this at the panel because Massimo asked me to be controversial, so I won't anticipate it now. I do think there's some magic somewhere at some point that happens. But I don't say that the whole thing is just ChatGPT based. I think there's a lot of tooling that can be based there. And the second part is where I don't know which techniques are going to work.
But do you think also that what he was saying is affecting the first part? Because I think, as you said, some of this problem can be different asked to the ego. How you can deal with this things changing?
I think in principle it shouldn't be bad if that discovery is correct. So the world changes every day is okay. The thing is that these things are trained once and doesn't have up-to-date information. So how do you have a language model that's trained on a lot of data, but takes into consideration the freshness of that data? I think that's the challenge. Because often it says, oh, my data is only based on data of 2021, so I don't know what happened yesterday. And we noticed that with these obsolete APIs that it was getting. The fact that they're different in their execution might even be a feature. Right? I'm not sure that's a problem per se.
We have time for 2 more questions. I think there was one in, oh, 3, okay, great. You're back.
Do you have any information or data on how this changes in terms of jobs and identity when switching from large language models to small language models?
I'm not sure I understand the question, sorry.
I mean, small language models, SNL, like specialized, more specialized,
Okay.
but not like
So you take away that specific type of job. I don't have information. So what I found was this paper, these people looked at the job market in general for something like ChatGPT. There is maybe what you could look at is like which job categories they consider more at risk. Like for instance, mathematicians, they consider at risk, especially for their work in statistics for insurance companies. So that's where my mathematician work. Maybe that's gone.
Okay, 2 more questions.
But I don't have data with me.
Yeah, I would also like to make this slide because from how I see like most of the information that you have to correct was like tokens or let's say endpoints. So at the end, I think to some extent you would have to, I don't know, elaborate the solutions so much that it would almost, let's say, resemble traditional programming again, so that you could then have, let's say, the prompt engineer as it's a new type of job that you have to this. Because also I think if you would, let's say, outsource all sort of, let's say, deploying the solutions to large language model, for example, you are somehow very vulnerable to raise that.
Yeah, so good point. The thing is, it's not only about the tokens, it's also about the correctness of the solution, right? So how do I know that that composition is actually doing what I asked? I have no guarantees of that. And the other thing is, how can I know if that's an optimal version according to some optimality criteria? That I also don't know. But I think it's a combination of both. Checking the details so it's runnable, but also what is it running? Is it running the exact thing that I want to do the composition? So that's where I think that testing is important. And one experiment we haven't done yet, but I think is also interesting, is to say, okay, you, user, do this composition by hand, and you do it with a tooling. Does the tooling work? Right? And what is the advantages of the tooling? What are the disadvantages? That would give us some insight on the state of the art of the technology right now and the tool. But that I don't have any data. I have some intuitions. We saw it on good examples, but we didn't do a systematic study.
Okay, one last question there.
About excellent work. I mean, all those uncertainty, large language model will eventually function. Didn't we think of changing service, the notion of service itself, to look like monkeys? In other words, can we do something that we expand the notion of service so that when we use large language model, we have some maybe full correctness or something better than what we have. Some version. Patiently and all that. You think we can change the service notion first?
It's interesting. I would like that would work, but I don't believe it. So because of the experience with service composition, right? If you look at the service composition we were doing for the last 20 years, we're always saying the description of the service is not enough. Please give me some precondition and postcondition, then I understand what you're doing, then I can compose you automatically, right? And I think you guys have the same problem. Give me a model of the execution of the background, then I can do it. And if I understand your question right, it's the same thing. Say, please give me some more information that LLMs can understand so I can compose you better. It's not going to happen, right? At least my experience in the last 20 years, it's never happened. It works in our toy examples in which you say, look, in this, I define my own precondition, postcondition, I define my own models of how the black box works, and then I can do much better compositions. But in practice, people say, okay, fast and dirty, this is the service, go out, and they don't provide extra information. Semantic web, same problem. Right? The amount of semantic web pages on the web is 5 million out of I don't know how many billions. Right? As a formal guy, I like the idea, but as a practical guy, I see usually the world doesn't go in that direction.
Okay, thanks. So let's thank Marco again. It was great. Sorry.
more than a question as food for food for the next panel. Everybody knows that we have on Thursday a panel about the next 20 years of ICSOC. And the presentation has been fantastic because Massimo and me were thinking if we consider writing a paper as a kind of composition, perhaps we should reflect on this our work should be done in the same way in the next 20 years. Because, for example, ICSOC has developing some guidelines for prohibiting the use of ChatGPT, public intelligence, artificial intelligence, for making the review of the paper. Yeah. And they are, the number of papers submitted to the conference are more and more higher. So I think that perhaps for the panel, we should think, for example, in this kind of things that I think is so more than a question because it's very provides a very long answer. Just please think about it because it's how we go. I think. So apart from that, thank you very much.